One of the reporters in the background, I'll back up to the very beginning because you can hear him say, "What have you done this year that we should talk to you?"
Well,
you were injured all year.
What have you done for us to talk to you about all year?
What have you done for us to talk to you about all year? Like, that's wrong. That's trying to bait someone. It's rude. At that point, in my mind as a journalist, you've injected yourself into the story and you're demanding answers. Who are you to demand answers for anything? Like, they don't owe you anything, and that includes an answer to any question you might ask. They can choose to answer that question. Hi, it's Danny O'Neill, and you might know me from such programs as The Dang Apostrophe. It's a newsletter on Substack that you can subscribe to. Or perhaps you know me from previous ventures, 7:10 a.m. a Seattle sports station. Before that, I covered the Seattle Seahawks for the Seattle Times, as well as a number of other jobs within media. Today, I'm going to take you into the dark, dank recesses of disappointment, the bowels of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers locker room, in which one player who is involved in a pivotal play of a disappointing loss is cornered and badgered by members of the cruel media.
I know when you ask me about these injuries and I give you my thoughts, if you really want to figure it out, I think Danny O'Neill has the best translations for me.
All right, so this right here is Giovanni Bernard. He is a running back, longtime running back in the NFL, currently plays for the Tampa Bay Bucks. And this is the locker room after Sunday's game against the Bengals, in which the Bucks blew the game. They had a pretty big lead. They lost that lead. They lost the game. And Bernard was involved in a fake punt gone wrong. And what we're going to do is watch the video footage of his post-game interview. It was posted by Jenna Lane, who's a reporter who covers the Bucks for ESPN.com. I'm going to jump ahead to the point where kind of they talk to him, and you're gonna hear the journalists initially kind of trying to get him to slow down to stop for the interview.
Well, you were injured all year.
What have you done for us to talk to you about all year? I talked to you Tuesday. Don't say you're not talking because I didn't talk to you all year.
You were also injured most of the season, too.
Just relax. Can I go to my family that I have outside? And
You
all
can.
of a sudden now?
Just don't say we didn't talk to you all year.
We just wanted to ask for your perspective on what happened
You're
there.
involved in one of the biggest plays of the game.
Okay.
Thank you, Jew.
All right. So what you just watched is kind of the behind the scenes of a pretty extreme example of post-game availability. And there's a couple of different things that are at play here. The first is the access that reporters have in the locker room, which they're entitled to by virtue of the press pass. And then is the attempt to get the people who were involved in the game to comment on what's happened. And this is a request usually. Hey, can you talk for a second? In this situation, it's pretty clear that there were a group of reporters waiting to talk to Bernard about what happened on the fake punt. Bernard did not appear to be interested in answering questions about it. And you hear them reference the "don't say we haven't tried to talk to you all year." This is my supposition. But it appears that what Bernard had said was, hey, you guys haven't wanted to talk to me all year. Don't ask me to talk to you right now. And went out to see people after the game. Now, that's the thing. Players do have family members that they go to see after the game. And here's where policy and access kind of converge. And I don't know if my view on this has changed over time or I just became more mature. But the league has a rule about the availability of players. Players are supposed to be available to answer questions. This is not something that a reporter, by virtue of being a reporter, is entitled to. If I cover Amazon, there's not a rule that Amazon has saying their employees are obligated to speak to me. However, if I'm a reporter who covers the NFL, that's a league that does have a rule that requires the players to speak with me, at least to some extent. Every sport's different in how this works. Football is different in large part because you have a group of guys. It's a fairly big locker room, and everybody's in the same locker room after the game. Marshawn would have people bring his clothes to a point of the locker room you don't have access to avoid having to get dressed at his locker and then walk out. But for the most part, everybody's in there. You wait until they put their clothes on or indicate that they're prepared to answer questions. You ask them your questions. They give you the answers, and it goes on. Baseball, in the Mariners clubhouse, not all players are sitting at their locker when you get in there. In fact, for years, there was issues of how many players were actually available after a game. And usually, kind of the reporters who cover the team the most have the best feel for kind of how that's going on. My own personal opinion is that there's no obligation an athlete has to answer my questions. If I ask them, would you like to talk about this? And they say no. In my mind, that's the end of it. I'm entitled to say they declined to answer questions. I'm even entitled to say how it sounded when they declined to answer questions. But trying to badger someone or to try and go to the league to say, hey, this guy won't answer my questions in violation of your policy, I disagree with. I think that you're asking a company that you cover to enforce their own HR policy. Some reporters would disagree with that, with the very valid reason that if you take that approach, we all lose out on the ability to hear from the players in the sports that we cover. That ultimately the audience, the readers, the listeners, the viewers get less input, get less perspective from the people that are principally involved in that. I can't say that's a wrong approach. I think that is sort of serving as a conduit for what the league wants. And it's my opinion that as an independent journalist, you're not beholden to that. Marshawn Lynch is a perfect example of this. Reporters, and specifically one guy, Bart Hubbock, who worked for the New York Post, would come in. He would have not covered the Seahawks for much of the season. He would come in and he would be mad that Marshawn Lynch wasn't available, and he'd complain to the league office, and he would get the league office to then contact the Seahawks, who would say, hey, Marshawn Lynch is not being made available. He needs to be made available. If he's not made available, he's going to be fined. Marshawn Lynch would then get mad because he's potentially going to be penalized. He's going to face a monetary fine because he won't answer questions as the league rule book entitles him to. My perspective, dude, that policy is between Marshawn and the league. I don't have any part in telling somebody that you need to make Marshawn follow your rules. It's not my job. I don't write stories about how, hey, you know what, this guy's in violation of the uniform requirements. It should be stuff that's, I think there's a basic transaction there between adults about, would you like to talk? And if you would not like to talk, I'm not going to try to resort to your own corporate bosses to make you talk, because there's a rule about that. So let's get back to the situation with Bernard. Because they're not threatening to get him fined, but they're wanting answers. And there's a belief that as a reporter, you have an obligation to talk to me. And that's where I think that these sort of things get a little bit tricky in what the media feels that they're entitled to. I don't think you should take it personally when someone says, I'm not going to talk. I don't think that's a personal affront to the right to know. I believe that that person has a choice when asked whether or not they want to talk, and if they don't want to talk, I'm not going to badger, cajole, shame, or in this case, almost insult a player into talking. It's poor manners. It looks bad. One of the reporters in the background, I'll back up to the very beginning because you can hear him say, what have you done this year that we should talk to you?
Well, you were injured all year.
What have you done for us to talk to you about all year?
What have you done for us to talk to you about all year? Like, that's wrong. That's trying to bait someone. It's rude. At that point, in my mind as a journalist, you've injected yourself into the story and you're demanding answers. Who are you to demand answers for anything? They don't owe you anything, and that includes an answer to any question you might ask. They can choose to answer that question. My first job covering pro sports was as a beat writer for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, and I was covering the Sonics. And Gary Payton would have periods where he didn't answer questions. And usually this just meant he wasn't available at his locker after the game. And there would be this cat and mouse, and it would go on for a little bit. And then usually a couple of the reporters would talk to somebody with the league office or talk to the Sonics PR person, and there would be an availability brokered, essentially. Gary would do it so he wouldn't get fined. I can't remember if I ever sort of co-signed on one of those. I know that I never called the complaint. But by the time I started covering the Seattle Seahawks in 2005, I had a very firm belief about how this should be handled. And I think it goes a little bit deeper even. As a sports reporter, you're given preferential access. Like, by virtue of being a credentialed member of the media, you get access to the locker room. You get the opportunity to ask them questions. You also get a different seat. You get food provided, although some papers, I believe, have had rules or require that to be paid back at the end of the year. So the idea that you're not getting favors, which could presumably influence your coverage. Like, you're not supposed to receive anything. You're not supposed to receive personal benefits based on your coverage of it. So there's all these gray areas, and then the access to it after the game. Like, that's something that is afforded to members of the press. And there can become, or some reporters take that as they have a right to not just be there, but have their questions answered. And I think that's extending it too far. So I've heard a lot of people who have debated, like, should the reporters have done this? Who was in the wrong here? Here's my opinion. Giovanni Bernard is completely within his right to say, I don't want to talk. You guys haven't talked to me all year. I'm not talking now. And every journalist that hears that is within their right to record, quote, and document exactly what happened. Do I have a problem, or do I think they should argue with him and in one case kind of insult him to try and get him to talk? I think that's poor form. There's nothing wrong with it. I think it's rude. But there is the fact of, like, they are trying to get answers, and sort of I don't want to say by whatever means necessary, because I don't think you should sit there and grab hold of somebody to do it. But sort of, if that's the discussion of we'd like to ask you these questions for this, and that ends up making him available, like, I'm basically just discussing the way in which you convince someone to answer your questions. I do think it's wrong to appeal to the league to enforce what is their own corporate policy. Because that corporate policy is there to benefit the league. That is because the league sees the benefit in what is essentially free advertising that comes from the way the teams, the players, the league is covered in general. So I do think that's wrong. I think it was wrong that Bart Hubbock consistently tried to get Marshawn Lynch fined because he wouldn't answer questions. It was like going and tattling to your friend's parents because he wouldn't let you play with his Legos. It's baby behavior. Like he's not doing what he's supposed to do. So I would say that. Gio actually, I would say this to his credit. You can see in the background he's talking to, and I know him from the NBA. He used to be the Rockets PR director, who kind of gets him to agree to stop and answer questions. And then what Gio does is freaking hilarious, in my opinion.
Okay.
Thank you, Jew.
I appreciate
all.
your time. We do.
We won't hold you.
We would have talked to you in the season, but also you were injured.
Just tell us what occurred on the punt.
Miscommunication, that's all it was on my part. I take complete fault for that.
Was it a fake?
I don't know. It was complete fault. My fault. That's it.
Is this something the team hasn't practiced
It's
this
all
week?
me. All me. That's something I did wrong, and that's all.
So you
It
weren't
was all
aware?
on me. Yep, number 25 out there, that was me. I was the one that did it.
But were you aware
It
that
was
it was
just
a
me.
fake?
Yeah, I messed up.
I understand that, but I'm just asking if you knew it was
I
coming.
We
messed
just
up.
didn't know if it was a communication
Yeah, I
breakdown.
messed up.
Thanks, Jew.
Yep. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Like a boss. It's really funny. That's really funny. And there's a couple lessons here. First of all, if you're a player, you can really conduct any press conference in which you just take personal accountability and responsibility like that. I'm not sure if it can ever make you come across worse. Because at the beginning, I kind of looked at it, I was like, okay, he's kind of he's trying to weasel out. He doesn't really want to answer questions about that play. And then you watch that, and I'm like, dude, what's the follow-up to that? Oh, you're not being honest about what happened? He's taking full responsibility. We don't really expect players to be honest. In fact, we get kind of mad when players are honest about whose fault it is if they're not saying it's their own fault, right? Like wasn't that one of the complaints about Russ, is that Russell never sort of takes enough accountability, like some of his teammates felt that way? So you can never actually go wrong. There's also not much of a follow-up question to "it's my fault, blame me." And you come out of it, Gio comes out of this looking best out of everyone that's involved there. I don't think this really matters. I don't think like how reporters look or how an athlete looks. Like I don't think those things really matter. I think we talk about it because we see it and it's interesting. I'm fascinated by it because of the power dynamics that exist, how sort of the different agendas play out, how a reporter's attitude plays into the characterization. Like here, you get the very real sense that there's this pack of reporters that have decided they need an answer from Giovanni Bernard about this. And then when they're trying to get it, they're coming at him from different angles. And he's like, whoa, what, where's this coming from? Like, I'm just trying to go out and see my family. They're like, but we need you to answer for this. And he's like, okay, my fault. Blame me. Number 25. That was me. You're like, coming out of it? He looks great. He looks great. And it's that's more of the appearances. It's superficial. It's entirely superficial. And it doesn't really matter. That question of how players get asked to account for things and when and who is forced to speak about those is very interesting to me. And it's always interesting to watch the dynamics. And I think that you learn a lot about people's coverage. I don't know much about the actual dynamics within the beat coverage of Tampa. The people that I know who covered the Bucks, like that's now phased out. Those guys that I knew from when I was writing for the Seattle Times. But it was very interesting. You come away from it, you're like, there was definitely a core group there that were demanding, we're going to have some accountability. He's going to have to answer for it. And they successfully cornered and badgered him into talking. And what they got from it kind of just made them look worse. My name is Danny O'Neill. I do have a podcast as well as a Substack newsletter called The Dang Apostrophe. I'd love it if you check it out, and I'll be posting back here on the YouTube channel shortly.